Picture this. The power goes out, not just for an hour or two, but for days, maybe weeks. Within 72 hours, the neighborhood you thought you knew transforms into something unrecognizable. Your friendly neighbors? They're now competing for the same dwindling resources you need. That grocery store down the street? It's already been ransacked. This isn't some distant dystopian fantasy. This is the documented pattern of every major grid failure in modern history. When the lights go out, civilization has a 3-day shelf life before desperation overrides every moral boundary people once respected. In this video, you're going to learn about the 10 most dangerous locations that become looting magnets the moment a blackout hits. Understanding these target zones isn't just useful information, it could literally save your life. Because when chaos erupts, being in the wrong place at the wrong time means getting caught between violent mobs, armed looters, and desperate individuals who've abandoned all restraint. Knowing where not to go is just as critical as stockpiling supplies or having a bug-out plan. Welcome to Food Decider, where we help you make the smartest survival decisions when everything falls apart. If this kind of life-saving information matters to you, hit that like button and subscribe, because when the grid goes down, this knowledge could mean the difference between making it through safely or becoming another casualty of the chaos. Let's start with the absolute first target, the place that gets hit within hours of the power failing. Pharmacies are ground zero for looting during any blackout, and here's why. Medications aren't optional for millions of people. We're talking about insulin for diabetics, heart medications, blood pressure pills, pain management drugs, and psychiatric medications. When the power fails, people with chronic conditions face a ticking clock. They've got maybe a 3-day supply at home, if they're lucky. After that, panic sets in hard. But it's not just the desperate patients you need to worry about. Pharmacies stock controlled substances, opioids, benzodiazepines, stimulants, drugs that have massive street value even in normal times. The moment word spreads that law enforcement is overwhelmed and response times have gone from minutes to never, opportunistic looters descend on these locations like locusts. You get this dangerous collision of genuinely desperate people trying to survive and criminals exploiting the chaos for profit. What makes pharmacies even more dangerous is how quickly they're targeted. Security systems fail without power. Those reinforced doors and alarm systems? Useless. Surveillance cameras? Dead. Within the first 12 hours of a major blackout, pharmacy windows are being smashed and people are grabbing everything they can carry. The violence escalates fast because everyone knows these supplies are limited and non-renewable. There's no delivery truck coming tomorrow to restock those shelves. What's there is all there's going to be, and that scarcity drives people to do things they'd never consider in normal circumstances. If you happen to be near a pharmacy when looting starts, you're in immediate danger, even if you're not participating. Looters don't stop to ask questions. They see you as competition or a potential threat. And if you're inside trying to legitimately get your prescription filled during the early hours of a crisis, you could be mistaken for a looter yourself when armed store owners or vigilante groups show up. The smart move is to stay far away from pharmacies once the power fails and never, under any circumstances, attempt to be a hero or try to get supplies from these locations after looting has begun. Now let's talk about gun stores, because these locations transform into literal battlegrounds faster than almost anywhere else. Here's what happens. The power goes out, and within hours, people start calculating their vulnerability. They realize police response times are stretched thin or non-existent. They hear reports of looting starting. They see neighbors getting nervous. And suddenly, everyone who doesn't own a firearm wants one immediately, while everyone who does own firearms wants more ammunition and accessories. The demand surge at gun stores during the first day of a major blackout is absolutely overwhelming. You get lines of people stretching around the block, all of them anxious, many of them armed already, and every single one of them operating on adrenaline and fear. Store owners face an impossible choice: keep selling and risk being overrun, or close up and become a target themselves. Either way, gun stores don't stay secure for long. What makes these locations exceptionally dangerous is the obvious fact that everyone there is either armed or trying to become armed. Arguments escalate into shootings in seconds. Someone cuts in line, That's a potential firefight. Someone tries to rob the place while others are shopping. Now you've got crossfire with panicked amateur shooters spraying bullets in every direction. And once the store's inventory is depleted or the owner abandons the property, organized groups move in to strip whatever's left. Gun safes get blown open, back rooms get ransacked, and the entire building becomes a fortress that violent gangs will fight over for days. If you're anywhere near a gun store after the first 6 hours of a blackout, you're in one of the most lethal zones in your entire city. These aren't just looting targets, they're strategic objectives for criminal organizations and desperate groups trying to arm themselves for whatever comes next. The only winning move is to stay miles away and never even drive past these locations once the crisis begins. Gas stations represent a different kind of danger, but they're just as deadly. Fuel becomes a survival resource the moment the power fails because people realize they might need to evacuate, travel to family members, or keep generators running. The problem, modern gas pumps require electricity to operate.
Without power, those underground tanks full of fuel might as well be on the moon, completely inaccessible to the average person. But that doesn't stop desperate people from trying. In the early hours of a blackout, gas stations become scenes of absolute chaos. Cars are lined up for blocks, drivers honking and yelling, everyone trying to get fuel while the backup power systems are still functioning at some locations. Fights break out over cutting in line, people siphon gas from other vehicles in the parking lot. Within 24 hours, most stations are completely dry anyway, but that doesn't stop the violence. Here's where it gets really dangerous. Gas stations typically have convenience stores attached, which means they stock food, water, cigarettes, alcohol, and other supplies people want. Once the pumps are dead and the store's security fails, these locations get looted hard. But unlike other retail spaces, gas stations have massive amounts of flammable fuel underground and in vehicles all around them. One spark, one bullet hitting the wrong thing, one idiot with a lighter, and the entire area becomes an inferno. Fires at gas stations during blackouts are catastrophically dangerous because fire departments are already stretched impossibly thin responding to other emergencies. That gas station fire, it's going to burn until there's nothing left, potentially spreading to nearby buildings and creating an expanding disaster zone. Anyone caught in or near a gas station during looting isn't just risking violence, they're risking being burned alive. After the first day of a blackout, gas stations should be treated as no-go zones, avoided completely unless you want to gamble your life on being in the wrong place when everything goes up in flames. Big box stores like Walmart, Target, Costco, and similar massive retailers become absolute war zones within hours of grid failure. These locations are attractive to looters for obvious reasons. They stock everything: food, water, clothing, electronics, tools, weapons, camping supplies, medications, baby formula, you name it, it's there in massive quantities. The problem is that everyone knows this, which means these stores get hit by hundreds or even thousands of looters simultaneously. The sheer size of these buildings makes them impossible to defend. Security guards, even armed ones, can't possibly cover all the entrances, loading docks, and garden center gates. Windows get smashed, doors get pried open, and waves of people flood inside. What starts as somewhat organized looting quickly devolves into pure chaos. People are trampled, fights erupt over merchandise, shopping carts become weapons. The entire building becomes a scene of indiscriminate grabbing, shoving, and violence. What makes big box stores particularly lethal is the mob mentality that takes over. Individually, most people would never consider looting, but when they see hundreds of others doing it, when they see their neighbors walking out with carts full of supplies, when they realize there's no punishment coming and the shelves will be empty soon anyway, normal moral restraints collapse. People who've never committed a crime in their lives suddenly find themselves part of a violent mob, and mobs don't think rationally. They stampede, they panic, they turn on each other when supplies run low. If you happen to be inside one of these stores when looting begins, maybe you were trying to legitimately purchase supplies early in the crisis, your odds of getting out unharmed drop dramatically. You could be mistaken for a looter by armed store employees or police, you could get caught in a stampede, you could be attacked by other looters who think you've got something valuable. The only rational decision is to avoid these locations entirely once the power fails. Whatever supplies you think you might get there aren't worth your life, and these buildings will be stripped bare within 24 hours anyway. Liquor stores might seem like an odd inclusion, but they become extremely dangerous looting targets for several interconnected reasons. First, alcohol serves a dual purpose during crises. It's both a substance for immediate consumption and an incredibly valuable bartering item. In a world where normal currency might be losing value and digital payment systems are down, bottles of liquor become tradable commodities worth more than cash. Second, and this is darker, there's a significant population of individuals dealing with alcohol dependency who face severe and potentially life-threatening withdrawal symptoms if their supply is cut off. When the power fails and liquor stores close, these individuals become desperate quickly. Alcohol withdrawal can cause seizures, hallucinations, and death in severe cases. People facing that reality will do absolutely anything to get alcohol, including extreme violence. Third, stress and fear drive people to seek chemical relief, and alcohol is the most readily available option. As the crisis deepens and people realize they're potentially facing weeks without power, without law enforcement, without normalcy, many turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism. This creates huge demand at a time when supply is fixed and decreasing. Liquor stores get hit hard during the second wave of looting after pharmacies and food stores have already been ransacked. The violence at these locations is often worse because many of the looters are already intoxicated, desperate, or both. Inhibitions are lower, decision-making is impaired, and conflicts escalate to lethal force faster. Broken glass from bottles become weaponized, people get doused in flammable alcohol during fights, leading to horrific injuries if fire starts. The entire scene is unpredictable and extremely dangerous. Pet stores are massively overlooked in the initial wave of looting, but they become crucial targets once people start thinking more strategically about survival.
Here's what most people miss. Pet stores stock enormous quantities of food. Not just pet food, but the kind of preserved, calorie-dense food that works just fine for human consumption in an emergency. We're talking about thousands of pounds of dried food with long shelf lives, canned meat products, and calorie-rich treats. Beyond food, pet stores stock supplies that are invaluable during a crisis. Heavy-duty leashes and chains can secure doors and create improvised restraints. Crates and cages can be repurposed for storage or even fortification. Antibiotics for fish tanks are chemically identical to human antibiotics and can treat infections when pharmacies have been looted clean. First aid supplies for animals work just as well on humans. Heating lamps, water filtration equipment for aquariums, portable carriers, the list goes on. The danger at pet stores emerges during the second or third day of a blackout when the smart, organized looters start hitting secondary targets that others overlooked. By this point, these individuals are often armed, experienced with looting, and willing to use violence to secure valuable supplies. If you show up at a pet store thinking you've discovered a clever, overlooked resource, you might walk into a situation where organized groups are already stripping the place and they view you as competition. Additionally, pet stores often have living animals still trapped inside during a blackout. Dogs, cats, birds, reptiles. These animals are stressed, hungry, and potentially dangerous. Large dogs might attack anyone who approaches. Escaped reptiles or other animals create additional hazards. The entire environment becomes unpredictable and dangerous, especially once the building's security has been compromised and multiple groups are moving through the space. Schools are massive repositories of resources that most people completely forget about until someone smart points it out. Think about what schools have. Industrial kitchens stocked with thousands of meals worth of food, water fountains with filtration systems, backup generators in many cases, first aid supplies, tools in workshop classrooms, sports equipment that can be repurposed, and functioning communication equipment in administrative offices. Larger schools, especially high schools and universities, have cafeterias that stock frozen food, canned goods, dry goods, and industrial cooking equipment. They've got nurses' offices with medical supplies. They've got maintenance sheds with tools, fuel for lawnmowers, and repair equipment. They've got gyms with showers and locker rooms. From a survival perspective, a school campus is an incredibly valuable target. The problem is that once people figure this out, usually a day or two into a prolonged blackout, schools get hit hard and fast.
What makes this particularly dangerous is that schools are large, sprawling campuses with multiple buildings and hundreds of entry points. They're impossible to secure, which means multiple groups often arrive simultaneously to loot the same resources. This creates violent territorial conflicts between groups who all want to claim the school's supplies. Furthermore, some communities might try to use schools as emergency shelters or distribution centers in the early hours of a crisis. If you show up at a school during a blackout, you might walk into a confused situation where some people are trying to maintain order and establish a legitimate shelter, while others are actively looting. It becomes impossible to tell who's who, what the rules are, or whether you're going to be welcomed or attacked. The entire situation is chaotic, unpredictable, and potentially lethal. Hospitals transform from places of healing into some of the most dangerous locations in any city once a blackout extends beyond the first day. Here's what happens. Hospitals have backup generators, but those generators typically only have enough fuel to run for 24 to 72 hours. Once that fuel runs out, every patient on life support, every person in the ICU, every individual requiring powered medical equipment faces immediate crisis. Medical staff face impossible ethical decisions. Do they stay at their posts trying to save patients manually, or do they abandon the hospital to protect their own families? Most choose their families, which means hospitals become understaffed or completely abandoned within the first couple of days. But the buildings are still full of incredibly valuable supplies: medications, surgical equipment, oxygen tanks, IV fluids, bandages, antibiotics, pain management drugs, and functioning medical equipment. This creates a nightmare scenario where desperate patients and their families are trying to keep their loved ones alive while opportunistic looters are ransacking the building for drugs and supplies. You get violent confrontations between families defending their dying relatives and criminals who don't care. You get people unplugging life support equipment to steal the machines. You get fights over oxygen tanks while people are suffocating. The physical environment becomes hazardous too. Without power, sanitation systems fail. Bodily fluids aren't cleaned up, bodies of deceased patients aren't removed, disease spreads rapidly in these conditions. Anywhere in a hospital can be potentially contaminated with infectious materials. Violent, stressed people are mixing with biohazardous materials in dark, confusing hallways. It's a recipe for disaster. If you or a family member need medical care during a prolonged blackout, hospitals are actually among the last places you want to be. You're more likely to encounter violence, infection, and chaos than you are to receive effective care. These buildings become death traps that should be avoided unless you have absolutely no other option, and even then, the risk might outweigh any potential benefit. Banks become focal points of violence and chaos during blackouts for reasons that might not be immediately obvious. In our modern world, most money is digital. It exists as numbers in computer systems, not as physical cash.
When the power fails and those computer systems go down, people suddenly realize they can't access their money. ATMs don't work. Card readers don't function. Online banking is impossible. The money exists theoretically, but practically, people are broke. This creates panic, especially among people who live paycheck to paycheck with no cash reserves. They descend on physical bank branches demanding their money in cash. But here's the problem. Banks don't actually keep much physical cash on hand anymore. A typical branch might have $50,000 to $100,000 in the vaults total, while serving thousands of customers with account balances totaling millions. There's no possible way to give everyone their money in cash. Bank employees quickly abandon their positions once they realize they're facing angry mobs demanding something they can't provide. The banks get locked up, but that doesn't stop desperate people from trying to break in. They think there are vaults full of cash inside, so they smash windows, break down doors, and ransack the buildings. What they find disappoints them: minimal cash and a bunch of useless computer equipment, which makes them angrier and more dangerous. The real violence at banks comes from the sense of betrayal and frustration. People feel like their money has been stolen by the system, like they've been lied to about the security of their savings. This rage makes them unpredictable and violent. Anyone near a bank during a prolonged blackout is at risk of being caught in riots, firefights with security, or violent confrontations between mobs and the few remaining bank employees or police trying to maintain order. Additionally, banks often have safe deposit boxes that people assume contain valuables: jewelry, cash, important documents, precious metals. Professional criminals know this, so organized groups specifically target banks to get into those safe deposit areas. These aren't desperate looters grabbing food. These are armed, organized criminals who will eliminate anyone in their way. Banks become battlegrounds between different criminal organizations, law enforcement if they're still responding, and desperate civilians.
It's a combination that makes these locations absolutely lethal. Now we come to the most important and most uncomfortable target, your own home. After everything that's been stripped from stores, pharmacies, and commercial locations, where do you think desperate people turn next? They start looking at their neighbors. They start remembering conversations about your camping gear, your food storage, your generator, your guns. They start calculating which homes might have supplies worth taking. This is why operational security is more important than the supplies themselves. If your neighbors know you're prepared, if you've talked about your stockpiles, if you've been vocal about prepping, you've painted a target on your home. During a prolonged blackout when desperation sets in, those same neighbors you've known for years might decide that your family's supplies are less important than their own family's survival. Home invasions during blackouts are particularly dangerous because they're often committed by people you know, neighbors, coworkers, acquaintances who know your routines, your family composition, your home's layout. They know when you're vulnerable. They know if you're armed. They know what you have that's worth taking. This makes them far more dangerous than random criminals because they can plan specifically to target you. The violence of home invasions escalates quickly because both sides are fighting for survival. You're defending your family and supplies. They're trying to take those supplies to feed their own families. There's no compromise position, no middle ground. Either they get what they came for or they don't. And desperate people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people on Earth. This is why the best survival strategy during a prolonged blackout is to appear unprepared. Keep your home dark when everyone else's is dark. Don't run generators that make noise and create light. Don't cook food that creates smells. Don't display any signs of having supplies or comfort. The goal is to look just as desperate and resource poor as everyone else, even if you're relatively comfortable inside. The moment you stand out as having more than your neighbors, you become a target. Your home should be your final fallback position, not your advertisement for preparedness. Everything about your approach to a blackout should be focused on becoming invisible, blending in and avoiding attention. Because in a world where the grid has failed and desperation rules, the most dangerous place you can be is somewhere everyone knows has what they need to survive. So, there you have it, the 10 locations that become death traps during a prolonged blackout. Pharmacies, gun stores, gas stations, big box stores, liquor stores, pet stores, schools, hospitals, banks, and ultimately your own home if you haven't maintained proper operational security. The pattern is clear. Anywhere supplies concentrate becomes a battlefield, and the smart survivors are the ones who avoid these locations entirely. The key takeaway isn't just knowing where danger concentrates, it's understanding that the best survival strategy is staying completely out of the chaos. Stock up before the crisis hits, maintain operational security so you never become a target. And when the lights go out and the looting begins, be somewhere else, staying quiet, staying invisible, and staying alive. If this information was valuable, make sure you're subscribed to Food Decider so you don't miss critical survival knowledge that could save your life. Hit that like button if you found this useful, and drop a comment letting me know if there are other survival scenarios you want us to cover. When chaos comes, preparation and knowledge are the only things standing between you and becoming another casualty. Stay safe out there.